This is Richard Guy Wilson. I'm a professor of the history of architecture here at the university, and we are about to take a trip around Thomas Jefferson's Academical Village. The Academical Village is frequently considered to be one of the most important works of American architecture ever created. And what we will see as we go up the lawn is ahead of us. There is the rotunda, and on either side we see rows of trees, and here we are headed towards the rotunda. The rotunda was, in a sense, the heart of the university, the center. Jefferson designed it to have classrooms on the ground floor, and then in the dome, which in a sense is the mind of the university, would be located the library. And so as we circle around, we see the different steps on the dome, the outline wings, of course, the great portico that is in the front, with a clock. The clock was one of the last elements to ever be installed on the university. Now as we come down in closer, we can see that it is basically a circular type of a shape. In actuality, Jefferson planned this to be the most ideal form of architecture, that there were certain ideal forms in architecture, such as the cube, the sphere, and that a sphere is encompassed within the rotunda. Now as we circle around on the north side, that is all additions to it. Since it's with any university campus, though we call this the grounds, there are going to be changes that can be made over time. The oculus is a replacement because Jefferson's oculus leaked the entire time. Now as we come around, we can begin to see how important nature is to all of this. And he planned the Academical Village that there should be trees that would be spread up the lawn. Now as we turn back down, we begin to see the different terraces. One of the problems that he had with the design and the construction of the university was that he could not find the level ground that he needed. And so the ground that we're looking at there was leveled by horses, by mules, and by labor, both enslaved and free labor, to create a series of terraces that would lead down towards the south, the southwest. His intention always was that you would have this open view that would stretch all the way to the south and to the mountains that are way in the beyond. But of course, changes again do occur, and so buildings have been placed there, but still we get a beautiful view of what it was that Jefferson intended. Now as we begin to circle back around, we can see some of the gardens that are behind the different pavilions. It was always intended that you would have pavilions that would be lining the lawn, 5 on each side, or be homes for the professors, and then behind them you would have the gardens. In between, you would have the student rooms. So now we're looking at a garden. These gardens were all redone in the 1950s and 1960s, but the intention of them was very much that you would have a place for the growing of certain vegetables for the pavilion occupants, the professors that were there, and also on the outer side there would be the hotels where the students would take their meals. These, said, have been redone over the years, but you get certainly a sense of the different types of spaces it's intending. the big common space of the lawn itself, and then the much more intimate spaces that are back in the gardens. Now, as we swing around, we can begin to see the pavilions on the east side of the lawn, and each one of them has a different front. What he wanted was different elements of architecture, the different styles. And as he wrote to several of his colleagues, Dr. William Thornton and Benjamin Henry Latrobe, that helped him on the design here, he wanted no two fronts alike. They should be specimens for the architectural lectures. And in other words, that the student would be learning from the environment just as much as they are learning from the professor talking away in the classroom. So the one we're looking at right there now is Pavilion number 2, based on the Temple Fortuna Virlis in Rome. It has an Ionic order on it. Next to it is Pavilion number 4, and that is a Roman Doric order. The orders in between are the Tuscan order. They're in front of the student rooms. And then as you go on down, we can see continuing these different fronts. One of the principles of classical architecture, and Jefferson was a believer in it, was symmetry, that the right ought to equal the left. However, here he totally disobeys that law, as said, so that we would get these different elements that the students would be learning from. None of the trees in the lawn are original, but he did intend always to have the trees there. And just prior to his death, the university bought a whole bunch of specimens, and some of those trees were planted. Now we're coming up on Pavilion number 8, which you can see the recessed portico with the columns. And then we swing around, again, back to the gardens. Underneath the student rooms and in the basements of the pavilions was where some of the enslaved help lived. We're looking down into a garden now, and they are very bucolic types of spaces. He also believed that nature should be one of the specimens of any person's education. Now we're looking back up towards the rotunda. And of course, that in a certain sense is the heart of the university. It controls it, with the great library upstairs and the classrooms down below. As noted, over the years there have been many additions. We can see a chapel. It was added in the 1880s. Jefferson did not believe that there should be a religious control. He was a believer in the separation of church and state. And this is a very unusual institution that it had no official religious affiliation. He did allow that there would be religious services held, but there was always a problem. Without the religion here, a bunch of heathens were being trained. And so the consequence was that finally a chapel was erected. Originally, it was a proposal to put a chapel right in the middle of the lawn, but thank goodness that didn't happen, but we did get that. Here we are back in the lawn, looking down towards the south, towards the entry. He intended as you'd come up from this point, with those great mountains that would be in the background. Now we're looking down at the pavilions on the west side. And one can see once again the different fronts, the 6 columns of that pavilion. Then as you move up past the tree, we'll come to a very different pavilion. One that is being worked on, that's Pavilion number 3, that had a Corinthian order. The orders are very important to Jefferson, and indeed some of these orders were actually carved in Italy by some men who came over here from Carrara, looked at the work here, and said, no, we should have to do the more complicated things out of good stone. We can't use some of the lousy stone that is around. Here we're coming back down, looking at the west side and swinging around. One can see from the movement, this is still very much the center. So what we have seen here is an aerial view, a type of view that practically no person ever gets, of one of the great American architectural creations that is routinely ranked at the very top, and indeed is one of the very few actual buildings and the only university campus that is on the UNESCO World Heritage Site, that has survived all of these years in such good shape, is a testimony to the enduring presence of this great architecture.